Spreadsheet Scholars, this is part 2 of our introduction to charting in Excel. We'll be using the Inditex financial data to recreate these 3 charts, and if you're using our IS text, you know that these are the 3 charts that you'll find in the Zara chapter, and then we'll learn to combine all of this data into a single combo chart. Let's learn. Now, if you completed the video lesson working with charts part 1, you can just open up the file that you saved at the end of the previous video lesson. But if you haven't done that lesson and you're starting from scratch, you can head over to the starter file folder at bit.ly/excel-starter-files, find the file charts-starter, right-click on that, download it to your computer, open it up in Excel, and regardless of how you got here, let's start at the Inditex tab. Now, for our first chart, we'll create a bar chart covering the net sales in millions of euros. So why don't we highlight the range from A3 through B27. Now note this worksheet has panes frozen so that row 3 and above and the leftmost columns stay where they are. And with this selection made, let's head to the Insert tab, we'll find the Recommended Charts pull down, and we'll select Clustered Column Chart. Now here's something useful to know. If your chart starts above the frozen panes, a portion of the chart remains fixed in the panes that are frozen, but the rest of the chart will scroll. This looks really weird, so I'm going to scroll up to the top so that I can see the whole chart. Then I'll move this whole chart to the right and just below the frozen pane so that it's not split when I scroll. Now I can see my vertical axis is formatted in euros, it's showing decimals, which I think add less value in a chart, so I'm going to get rid of the decimals. Now the formatting of my worksheet is currently linked to my chart, so one way that I can change this is to select the data range that I'm plotting, that's B4 through B27, and then in the home ribbon, I can click on the decrease decimal icon twice, then scroll up top. Sometimes Excel takes a little while to refresh, but my chart is here. There we go, now we can see it. And we can also see that the euro values in the vertical axis no longer show decimals. But maybe I want to keep the formatting on the worksheet, but I want to change the formatting on my chart. Well, that's possible too. I'm going to press the undo keyboard shortcut twice, that's Command-Z on Mac, Control-Z on Windows, and that'll bring back my 2 decimal points. And to format just these numbers on the chart axis, I'm going to right-click to select the euro values on the vertical axis. I'll select Format Axis, and we saw this in the prior video lesson. We can scroll down and click on the triangle next to number, and in this grouping we see various options that we can use to customize the formatting of these axis values. I'm going to change the decimal places to 0, press Return, and now we see there are no decimals in the axis label, but the formatting of the source data in the worksheet remains untouched. We've still got the decimals in there. Nice! Now when I look at these columns, I prefer the aesthetic where the columns are wider and the spaces between them are smaller, so we learned how to do this in the prior lesson. If you just click a column, you don't even have to right-click and pull up that context-sensitive menu. The formatting pane on the right is already showing, and it's also context-sensitive, so it'll change and show the Format Data Series option for the columns. And on an option over on the right, we see Gap Width. We'll set that to 20%, that's a nice value, press Return. The gap between the columns shrinks to only 20% of the width of the column, and I think that makes the chart look much better. Now for this next bit, we're going to create some more charts, so I want some more room. I'm going to hide the formatting pane on the right by clicking on the little X in the upper right-hand corner, and I'll zoom out to 100%. And now next, I want to create a chart showing net income just below the current chart. Now one way to do this, which you already know, is by making a non-adjacent selection. So I could highlight A3 through A21, then hold down the Command key on the Mac or the Control key on Windows, and then click and drag from C3 through C21. But if I did this and went up to Insert, I'd have to recreate everything that I've already done on the chart from scratch. So I'd have to change the number formatting, I'd have to change the column width on the new chart. But instead, let's introduce a new technique, and it's a better technique because this will allow us to make a copy of the existing chart, and that copy will retain all of its existing formatting, and then after the fact, we can go ahead and change the data range that we're charting. Here's how we do that. So what we want to do is we want to click to highlight the entire chart, not just the elements inside of it. So see how the only highlighting are the external boxes in the corners of the entire chart, nothing inside of it. Then I'm going to press my copy keyboard shortcut. That's Command-C on Mac, Control-C on Windows. Now one thing to warn you about, you want to click off the chart and then onto the worksheet, clicking the location where you want to paste your new chart. And if you don't do this and you keep the selection on the current chart, this is what will happen. So I'm going to press Command-V, my paste shortcut on the Mac, Control-V on Windows, with the chart still selected, and this adds a copy of the exact same data series inside the chart. So that's why I now see 2 columns for every value. That's not what I want, so I'll undo this, Command-Z Mac, Control-Z Windows. Then I'm going to click off of the current chart onto the worksheet where I want that chart to be pasted, then paste it in, Command-V Mac, Control-V Windows, and I get a complete copy of my first chart with all its formatting. Well, that's fine, but how do we change the data range inside of this? Well, that also is remarkably easy. Click the columns in our second chart, and then take a look to the left. You see how our worksheet is showing our selection for the data range used to produce this chart? Well, we can actually move the selection boxes on the worksheet to change the selection on our chart and recreate the chart using the data in our new selection. This is how we do it. Follow along. I'm going to position my cursor along the border of the blue rectangle that represents the data range from B4 through B27. Those are the numbers that are plotted in my column chart. And then when I see the white Mickey Mouse glove, I'm going to click, hold down my mouse, drag to the right. Now I'm not dragging data, I'm just dragging and changing the selection. I'll line it up with the range that's just to the right, so it's around C4 through C27. Now before we let go, watch the second chart. Now let go, and bam! We just changed the data selection for the data we're charting inside this second column chart. Very cool. Now it also looks like the title of this chart comes from the selection in B3, so why don't we go up, Mickey Mouse grab the pink box that's around B3, we'll drag that selection and drop it over C3, and look at that. Now we've updated our chart title as well. Super slick, super fast. That is another worthy trick for your excellent Excel repertoire. Now let's do this one more time so that we can create a column chart showing the growth in the number of Inditex stores over time. And since we still have our first chart on our clipboard from where we copied it earlier in this lesson, I'm just going to click on the worksheet where I want to insert the new chart. I'll paste it in here. And now notice we've got the data selection from our very first chart, but I'm going to change that. And now here's another trick. I can move the selection for both the title and the data range at the same time. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to move my cursor up so that I get my Mickey Mouse hand just above the pink selection in B3. Then with the Mickey Mouse glove showing, I'm going to click, drag to the right. Notice that I'm dragging both the column header as well as the data selection below it. I'm going to drop this into the cell starting in D3, and when I let go, will you look at that? With just one keystroke and one click and drag, we've created a brand new chart showing our store's data. Now we need to do one more thing to improve this third chart. Our vertical axis is listed in euros, but our third chart isn't plotting a value in euros. It's actually showing a count of the number of stores. So we want to get rid of the euro symbol, but you already know how to solve this problem. Why don't you challenge yourself to see if you can format the vertical column in this last chart as numbers without the euro symbol. So why don't you pause? Give that a shot, and remember, if for some reason you messed up, you can always undo to go back to where we left off, and hopefully you got the solution we're about to demonstrate. So the way we solve this challenge is we right-click on the axis that we want to format, we select Format Axis from the context-sensitive menu, we head down to the number formatting over on the right-hand side, we change the pull-down that says Accounting so that it now says Number, we see the euro format will go away, we see down just below this that we're going to keep the comma in the number as a thousands placeholder, and we like that. We've just changed our format. Nice work. Well, now that we've created these three charts and we've done it pretty quickly, we want to finish off with this combo chart. Now this chart is actually three different charts in one with two different chart styles. We've got two line charts valued in euros, one line showing revenues, the other showing net income or profits, and then we also have this column chart. We see the axis over on the right shows this valued in numbers, and this is a count of the Inditex stores. So let's create this combo chart bad boy. Now let's make some room by clicking on the X in the format pane to get rid of that. And this new chart is going to show all of our data, so why don't we select the worksheet data range from A3 through B27, and with that selected, we'll head up to the Insert ribbon, we'll look under Recommended Charts, and let's start first by accepting Excel's offer of the line chart with the 3 lines in it. I'm going to position this chart to the right of my other 3 charts, and I'll click and drag in the lower right-hand corner of the chart to make it a little larger. And I want my stores line to show up on a separate axis. I want that to be valued as numbers, not in euros, and I also want this to show up as columns, not a line. Well, if we take a look at the legend down below, I can see that the gray line in the legend down here represents the store count. Now that's my center line, so I'm going to click on the gray line. We see the entire line is selected. Then I'll right-click, select Format Data Series from the context-sensitive menu, and over on the right under Series Options, I'll select Secondary Axis. And we see this creates a secondary axis in our chart. The top value of the axis on the right is now 8,000. That's a number closer to the largest entry for the number of stores column in our data, so the line shifts up to the top, and this data is already formatted without the euro symbol, so no extra steps are needed to change the secondary axis formatting. But now let's change the chart type for our selected line so that this shows up as a column chart instead of a line chart. And this is a little trickier to do. You might think, okay, I'm going to head up to the Insert ribbon and then just pull down this icon that shows the column charts and select one from here. But no, this isn't at all what we want. So let's undo that And instead, what we want to do is we want to head up to the Chart Design ribbon. Now, if we head over to the right, we see an option we've never used before, which says Change Chart Type. That's what we want to do. So with the line we want to change in our chart still selected, we'll pull down this menu, we'll select Column, we'll choose Column Chart in the upper left, and look at that, combo chart created, 2 lines and a column chart. Looking good. Let's reduce the gap width so that these columns are closer together. We'll click the columns, and then over on the right where it says gap width, we'll set this to 20%, press return, and that's looking great. Now, since we also have 2 axes, primary and secondary, left and right, with different units, euros and stores, let's add some axis labels. We can do this by heading up to Add Chart Element in the Chart Design tab, and we'll find axis titles, and let's start by selecting secondary vertical. This inserts a title next to the secondary axis on the right. Now by default this says axis title, so let's link the actual column title in our worksheet with the axis title that we've selected. So with this axis title selected, let's head up to the formula bar. We'll type an equal sign into the formula bar, then let's scroll to the left, and in our worksheet data, let's click D3. Now this will link the data in cell D3 to our axis title, so press return, and we see total stores, which is the value in D3, now shows up as the axis title. Cool. Let's also add an axis title to the leftmost axis, that's our primary axis. So we'll head up to Add Chart Element again, we'll select Axis Title, but this time we'll select Primary Vertical, and we get an Axis Title, which is the generic label Axis Title, but let's change this. Now this time, we don't want to set this equal to anything in our worksheet. B3 says net sales, C3 says net income. It would be better if we just put in the generic text millions of euros. So instead of using any of the cells in the worksheet, instead of typing an equal into the formula bar, we can just enter the plain text millions of euros, press return, and we've got that text in our secondary axis. Now let's also set the title, so we can click on the title. Now we will take our chart title from the worksheet, so we'll put an equal sign into the formula bar, and then we'll click on cell A1. And the formula in here looks a little bit different. That's because A1 is actually a merged cell from A1 through D1, but that's totally fine. When we press return, we get the result that we want. We see that the title is now listed as Inditex Historical Data, which is taken from our worksheet. Now why don't we also increase the point size for the title to 20, and we'll boldface this, and the chart looks great. Now there's just one more common chart editing feature that I want to show you in this video lesson, and that's how you can edit the grid lines that appear in the chart. Now I like the grid lines that we're showing, but sometimes you want to change these, so let me show you how to do that. So why don't we change our grid lines on our combo chart. Now the grid lines in this chart are these thin horizontal lines that make it easier to read from the axis values to the actual values that are plotted in our lines and columns. So to format the grid lines, just click on one of the grid lines in the chart. That should select them all, but you might have to click twice because the first selection will sometimes select the plot area of the chart. But if you don't select the grid lines in the first try, if you position your mouse pointer exactly on the grid line and click again, you can try that maybe more than once. You should notice eventually you'll select a grid line, and you'll know you've selected the grid lines because the grid lines will have these little circular handle indicators at the ends of the lines. Then over on the right, you see options for formatting the major grid lines. Feel free to experiment with these options, but you can see, for example, we can change the width of the grid lines. I'll demonstrate this by changing the width from 0.75 points to 5 points. The gray lines get much thicker. You can also use the color option up here to change the color, so you can see now they're red. Transparency starts at 0, meaning the lines are completely visible, but if you slide this to the right, you can see the lines start to fade out. Want to get rid of the grid lines? Just select None in the line group. Now this also takes away all of the other settings because there are no grid lines to edit. I'll click back on this automatic setting that will return the grid lines to their default setting, and you can perform all sorts of additional tweaks to further customize your chart. For example, why don't we click the legend at the bottom and set that to 14-point font so that it's easier to read, and we can set the axis values and axis labels to 12-point font. Now, unfortunately, we can't make a multiple selection and then just do that font change once. We've got to do this one at a time. And even though we didn't demonstrate everything, you can figure out more options through experimentation. For example, if you wondered, how do we increase the thickness of the lines in our line chart? Well, you know things in Excel are context sensitive, so let's click on the revenue line, that's this blue line, and we can right click and we see Format Data Series is here. We know that gives us our formatting option, so let's select that. Now we see these icons across the top of the format pane, and the Format Data Series icon is already selected. That's the one that looks like a column chart. But why don't we see what additional options we can find by clicking on the paint bucket? And sure enough, we see options for formatting our line. Now there are lots of different options in the line group here, including one labeled width. So I'll type a new width of 5 points in here, press return, and hey, mission accomplished. We've got a thicker line. Now once the formatting pane is up, we can just click on our other line. Now we see the orange net income line is selected, and the values in the formatting pane are showing the options for the orange line. So we can change that line's width to 5 points as well. Looking good. What about snazzing up the gray in our columns of our column chart? Why don't we click a column? We've now selected the columns. We can see that the fill options show up for the columns in here, and we can experiment with some new colors. I really like this softer green, and with these last few tweaks, we've concluded another video lesson. And once again, Your Excellency, superb work acquiring even more exceptional Excel charting skills. We covered working with duplicate charts, resetting the data range for an existing chart, creating combo charts, setting secondary axis values, linking labels to worksheet cells, editing grid lines, and changing line thickness and chart element color. I hope you're feeling like a chart champion, and I hope that you have a truly excellent day. Keep at it!